Today on Dolby Creator Talks, we are continuing our coverage of the 2024 Academy Awards with the sound team behind Maestro, director Bradley Cooper's stunning biopic of Leonard Bernstein. This film is nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Cinematography, and today's category, Best Sound. Joining us are the nominees from the film's sound team: Richard King, the sound designer and supervising sound editor, with his 8th Academy Award nomination, going for his 5th win. He is a double nominee this year, also up for his work on Oppenheimer. Re-recording mixers Tom Ozanich, who has 4 nominations under his belt, and Dean Zupancic, with 5. Both Tom and Dean are also nominated twice this year for Maestro and The Creator. And Stephen Morrow, Maestro's production sound mixer, celebrating his 4th nomination. Maestro is a highly stylized and intimate film about Bernstein, his fraught marriage, his affairs, his family, and of course, his storied career. This gave director Bradley Cooper an amazing opportunity to conduct extensive recreations of some of the composer's famous concerts, all recorded live on set. The film features a Dolby Atmos mix that really blew us away. So let's hear from the team about their work on the film. Richard, you talk about Bradley wanting the track to communicate a sense of time and place, and I love the way this movie opens. I'm not talking about the bookend scenes, but I'm talking about that first. Bradley, young Lenny Bernstein gets that call when he's 25. We figure out later that he's living in an apartment on the top of Carnegie Hall, so he runs down into the theater. The camera's doing this crazy swooping move. It's black and white, 4:3, and immediately, it says to the audience, there's going to be a presentational aspect to this. There's a strong hand guiding you through this, but it also kind of felt like a 1940s movie to me. And I'm kind of curious, that sense of this movie feeling like a period piece. How did that dictate your choices from a sound effects and design perspective, and also in the mix?
Well, I thought about that a lot, and I think that he did want to use sound effects and sound design like sound effects were used in movies of the 40s. That is, very specifically, if you heard a sound, there was a reason to hear that sound. It wasn't necessarily. It wasn't. The dog barking down the street. If the dog barked down the street, that meant someone was going to show up at the door. There was a specific reason for each sound, and that evolved a little bit in the course of the film. That as we thinned out some scenes, or made the sounds more specifically emotion inducing or emotion supporting. And the look of the film, the opening is so good, and so it just brings you into that place, his frame of mind, the excitement of that moment, that period of history, so well. And all of that, I think, works together. The aspect ratio, the black and white, the nature of the picture editing is very snappy and kind of 40s stylish, very stylistic. So subsequently, the sound design needed to be kind of stylistic and not, necessarily rigidly realistic.
Yeah, one of the funny things when we first were kicking around, various ideas, before we started mixing anything, and kind of what Richard was mentioning, some of the early spotting and conversations that we had early on, we kicked around some ideas about trying to potentially treat the sound of the film, something representative of those eras, whether we were going to, we talked about using, old tube gear, potentially recording something off to an optical track and then bringing it back in. So we got like a real authentic optical sound. And anyway, we kicked around all these different sort of treatment type ideas, and then ultimately when none of that is, all that's going to be kind of distracting technical stuff, and we don't want to do that. We want to very gently, subtly, impart this flavor of those things, and not actually do anything that heavy-handed. And honestly, I have to say, I'm surprised that it reads as well as it does, because it seems like, from our standpoint, something that we were very, judicious and subtle about, not trying to, you know, hit anybody over the head with it, and just kind of just give it that flavor and that feeling of those, each of the decades as we kind of progress through the movie. But probably the biggest thing to it is really like the density of sound, and like Richard was talking about how, older things, they just had less in the soundtrack, and they were very specific things. And as you get into a more modern area, there's more detail and fuller, more depth to, how many sounds are playing and stuff.
They weren't the style in the 40s and 50s. They weren't spending a lot of time worrying about ambiances, were they?
The ambient, what we have are they're layered, which they didn't layer back then. But the tightrope was that. Speaking of the scene that you were just talking about, we're very tight. We're very 40s-esque. But then the score comes in and we hit full face Atmos. So we're weaving that we're blurring that line and towing that tightrope of going, hey, this is a 40s film, but you're in Atmos. Oh my goodness, the atmospheres are Atmos, but you don't feel it. It's not smacking in the face other than when the music comes in. And that was designed. That was always to be the character. So when music went away, the sound effects had to fill the void, if you would. And then a lot of scenes in there, no score, big dialogue driven dramatic scenes that the sound effects are playing that emotion. And then the score comes in.
As Jason said, in a normal movie, the composer would have been asked to score, that scene. But I'm glad that we had the chance to, provide some of that kind of background feeling ourselves using sound effects.
I had a question that I wanted to ask you about that. It was such an interesting decision to me to use Bernstein's music to score the film. And there were just some moments that are just so amazing. I just wrote a note to myself, like I was so captivated by that scene with it's from Lonely Town, the Pas de Deux, right when we see Felicia for the first time. She gets off the bus and she's walking down the street towards a party, and just like you lean into the music on that, and it's just so satisfying. It's really beautiful in that moment. But I think, to your point, like there were also probably a lot of moments that, were a little bit quieter, more interior, that you might have asked a composer to compose something specifically for those, but you didn't really have anything. So that was an interesting, sound effects and sound design challenge, Richard, for you. And then obviously for Dean to mix that stuff in.
I also have to say that, to Bradley's credit, how do you have a composer compose music to a Leonard Bernstein, movie without it just being like,
who would have the guts? Who would have the guts to do that?
We have Lenny's music. Let's use it when it's appropriate. When it's not, let's let it hang.
One of the things I think is so cool about what we're talking about here, and the way the music is used in the movie, is very little of it is used in the way that a traditional score is. I mean, that does exist, but there's not that much of it in the movie. Like this, when this music plays, like you said, in the scene when we first meet Felicia, it was designed, it was supposed to be like just grand and overwhelming and wow.
It's operatic in a sense, right? We know we are meeting the heroine of the film at this moment.
Exactly. And it's just so great that then in the other scenes, to contrast that, meeting her, and then, skip forward a couple of scenes to when the two of them go down into the underground theater and they have this big, fairly lengthy scene, and there's no music until the very end that's taking us off into another scene. And what's so great about it is it really highlights their incredible performances. There's nothing like it's so quiet and intimate that everything is exposed, not just for sound, but for their performances, everything that's going on there. You get a depth, of detail that you would normally never get, and without having the music there to fill in the spaces, the space is filled in by, the reverb of the space and little movements they make and all these little nuancy details.
A gift for me, my liege.
Oh, that's very good.
It's your name.
With your little spots of wax, White Rose, you look like the extravagantly hands of the flower.
No.
You look like the eye of a broken moon.
Oh, you're terrible.
What's your line?
You're always changing, my love. I didn't see you yesterday, but I looked at your horse. It's so beautiful. But not as beautiful as you are. Because you are a dragon.
I'm glad you brought that scene up because it's one that I wanted to talk with you guys about. I think, when people think about the sound of Maestro and the sound design and the mix, it's, you want to, there are certain, big sequences that we will talk about in a few minutes. But my attention was really captured by that scene in the basement theater between the two of them. And Steve, I would love for you to talk just a little bit about, part of what we're talking about this aesthetic of the 1940s movies is that rat-a-tat dialogue overlap. They didn't overlap back in movies of the 40s because they couldn't really get away with that. But you've introduced that as a conceit, but just recording that dialogue. And I don't think there's a scene in this movie where people aren't talking with a cigarette dangling out of their mouths. And just tell me about capturing that and trying to maintain that intelligibility all the way through the process.
For one, we have an amazing dialogue editor. That is a key in this as well.
This is Tony Martinez you're talking about?
Tony Martinez, yes. And he's incredible. But those scenes, especially like the theater where they're on stage together, the way the film is shot, especially with that open light, you had the radio mic 'em, and you had to be careful where they were going because there was a lot of movement. And so there's occasions, when you're on set, you're always looking and you're always thinking, okay, now they're really close. Felicia's mouth is right here, right next to his tie. Oh, that's where his mic is. So guarantee, and you can sit there and A/B it in your headphones live and you're like, okay, her mic sounds way better, or her voice sounds way better on his mic. And right. But that, you're recording everything and you know that, the team, and the, in post we'll be able to look at it and really listen to both sides of it and go, oh, this is better for this line. This is because there are times where she is so quiet, but it works because, there's that, it's the signal's there. We're recording it and we're making sure that it's as clean as we can. But also you have, a camera that pushes along a wooden stage, and it's on a dolly and the camera's 600 pounds, on a 100-year-old stage. So, is there going to be creaks and cracks? And behind camera, there's 25 people trying to do their thing. And, so it's a team effort when you're on set to make sure, okay, minimum people need to be moving. Can we put down extra plywood on top of the stage to make sure those creaks aren't as loud? Because you can soften those creaks out. And there's just a bunch of pre-thought that goes into it. And then sometimes you're just stuck. It's a giant wide shot that the dolly's going to push in the whole time you see the floor, and they're not going to paint out plywood. So, but yeah, the idea was always not to get in the way of the performances. If you want to overlap all the dialogue, let's do that, but let's do it in a way that we can record it. Let's make sure we've covered everybody's, dialogue with radio mics or booms or, just to have everybody on a microphone no matter what. And then to sit back at the cart and just listen without, sometimes it's easy to read along to the script and you know exactly what they're saying because you're reading it. And so sometimes you just have to listen without reading along and make sure you're understanding what they're saying. And if the clarity is there, then it's there.
For the rest of the guys, Richard, Tom, and Dean, tell me about what's the approach to mixing a scene like that? Because, I know the dirty little secret is sometimes those are the hardest scenes to mix because you got nothing to hide behind. There's really nothing like, it's just, there's not a lot of, no explosions to be heard in that scene to kind of cover up, bumps in the track. And so, I just imagine that must have been such a difficult scene to mix because, it's so simple.
So simple and yet so hard. Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's like, that's, kind of what we're saying is that there is nothing to hide behind. So, anything that's a problem is a real problem, whether that just is room noise or, a part where we're transitioning between the two or whatever mics are available to us to get them to sound the same so that you never question even that you're, want anybody ever thinking about microphones when they're watching a movie. And so, it's so much about every little detail, and there's, you slave over every syllable, and you slave over, okay, like I got all this part working well, but there's just these 3 words, that are kind of lost in noise that I can't dig out, or they're, they turned away or something. And how do I save that? And there's almost no ADR in this entire movie. There's, I think, 2 or 3 lines of ADR. And none of them are in that scene. So, it's literally, a fine tooth comb of going through and, it starts there. It starts with that dialogue, obviously. And then, Dean and Richard have to come in with, the other stuff, the Foley and the backgrounds and everything, and shape it to make it support the dialogue and fill in all that stuff.
But that's the selection of what Richard picks in order to give me the material to mix. I mean, the selection of the backgrounds and the effects and the Foley was great, but it all sounds so natural that has to sit with the dialogue that Steve recorded and Tom mixed. It can't be a different. It's oversimplification of describing, but it can't be just any interior air. It has to be the air that has to sound like that air. Wherever Richard got it, the secret he will not tell us.
Richard, do you want to give us any secrets? What's your approach to a scene like that when you're supposed to be as invisible as possible?
Yeah, and that was the goal, obviously, to be invisible, and anything that was sort of wrong jumped out at you. So we did redo some Foley that sounded a little fake or something, and we had there's a light buzz because there's a electric incandescent bulb that's in the shot in that scene that's lighting the stage. There's a little bit of that comes and goes. It's not there throughout the scene. But there wasn't a whole lot of air in there that I remember. There was as they come down the stairs, we hear a subway rumble by because it's the village. So presumably the F train is not, somewhere in the vicinity. But after that goes away, the music's still playing there. So after that goes away, it gets very quiet, and it's just a very light kind of invisible, almost air, just something to make the kind of widen out the sonic space a little bit. And then that little bit of light tinkle, flutter, buzz that comes and goes, just that almost accentuates how quiet the space is, that you can hear that incandescent bulb. So it kind of I think as an audience, it draws you in to the voices and the acting.
I think the reverb, on the dialogue and everything really plays a kind of a critical role in that scene, because it is what is, in those spaces, right? They say a line and you're kind of hearing the room, and that defines the room. It kind of gives you the real sense of space of that room, and it kind of makes you linger on what they're doing more, what they're talking about and everything, because you're kind of just you're able to feel all of that fade away into the distance.
So I'm curious, Tom, you talked about getting some room on that. Was that something that you did with reverb in the mix, or Steve, did you get a wide mic of them in the theater to kind of feed back in, or?
No, we didn't do any. No, sometimes we'll do IRs, but no, not in that theater.
That's all put on there. I think it's pretty much mostly all lavs in there, and
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that's put on there. And, I mean, in a way, one of the great things is that we were able to, between what, Steve recorded and the way we had the tracks, we were able to get them, fairly dry because of them being lavs and whatnot. So then I could, put this great reverb on there, and it really becomes, sort of unifying to everything, and really, you're not fighting with some other weird things that are in there.
Steve, I wanted to ask you about that, because I know that you were pretty dependent on, there was key sequences when you had to use, wireless mics. One of the things that I was so impressed with in the film is there's some key confrontation sequences between Felicia and Lenny that Bradley covered in very wide shots with no coverage. I'm thinking about, when they had that really tense conversation by the pool in Fairfield. And then of course the famous, the Snoopy scene in the Dakota, which is all played in one from a pretty wide angle. And these are really long, very emotional scenes. So, was that completely all lav? Were you able to hide microphones anywhere to get any other kind of, any sound on that?
No, I mean, for the most part, with the movie, the way that Bradley works is he, he'll be on set and he'll see something that interests him, like a frame far back behind the fence, through the trellis, and he'll go, "Oh, this is great. Here, Felicia, come on over, have a seat. Okay, here, guys, start rolling." And then we start rolling. And so you have to always be prepared, which means we're radio micing everybody no matter what. No matter what, even if it's a close-up and that's all we're shooting for the day, we're going to radio mic you, have it on a track. Because when he decides, what would be cool, let's just do that scene over there and we'll just cover our faces and just play it in the wide. You have to be ready for it. And in a lot of the movie, we'll start in a big wide and they'll either walk towards camera or walk away. And so you can never really rely on coverage, because there wasn't a lot of coverage, so it was like you always prepared for it to be whatever shot we were going to shoot is the only shot of it. Oh, we're going to go in for a close-up. Okay, that's great. Now we have a close-up. So we're able to do other things, but you always prepare for the, not worst case scenario, but for the widest scenario.
You want to be sleepless and depressed and sick. You want to be all of those things so you can avoid fulfilling your obligations.
What obligation?
To what you've been given, to the gift you've been given.
Please.
My God.
The gift comes with burdens, if you had any idea.
The burden of feigning
I'm sorry
honesty
to just
and
admit it,
love.
but that's the truth.
But above all, you love people. And
I do love
from that
people.
wellspring of love, the complications arise in your life.
That's exactly right.
Wake up, take off your glasses.
I was pretty astounded by that. I got to have a conversation a while back with Michelle Tesoro, your picture editor, about those sequences, and she told me that Bradley he felt the courage of his convictions. He did not shoot coverage. Those wide shots were the only way he shot those scenes. Like, that's amazing.
And that's where you sit back, because other filmmakers, you go, oh, it's a wide shot. Here, let's do a quick plant mic on the table for the wide, and we'll go in for coverage, and it'll be booms, and it'll sound great. But you can't really do that, on Bradley's set, because you could get caught, not being prepared or not having what, because he'll shoot a shot and go, no, we'll cover it. And then shoot a shot and goes, oh, no, that's great. No, we don't need to cover it. And then he moves on, so that you have to be prepared that every shot is the only shot of the scene. And then if it is more than that, then you have more options, but so that's how we always played it. We just radio mic'd everybody all the time, because in my mind, if I shortchange these guys in post, then I'm doing a disservice to the entire project. Whereas if I give them too much stuff, that's okay. They can mute it, they can delete it, they can get rid of it. They don't need to use it, but they can't use it if it's not there.
Tell me about a sequence like the party sequence at the Dakota, Everybody's, God knows how many radio mics you had on all those people kept. But then, so that material goes to you, Richard, and then Tom. Tell me how you how you start to shape that. Steve, let's start with you. Tell us how you capture that first.
The Dakota scene, that's basically the first scene in color. That scene was shot, basically there's the Bradley side and there's the Felicia side. So there's two sides of the story, and he films it at the same time with two cameras, one on him, one on Felicia and her friends. And so you're shooting two scenes at the same time, and they're overlapping all over each other. And the way you cover it is you radio mic everybody who's going to talk, and then everybody who might talk, and then everybody who's close to talking, because he wants everybody to talk. And then you put plant mics around to hear some of the extras, and you have some booms flying over for some of the wider stuff. So the hard part on the production side is you're looking at two monitors, one with Bradley side, one with Felicia side, and you're just kind of putting both scenes in a mix. So Michelle in the editing room is going to be like, oof, when she's seeing Felicia, she's hearing Lenny, and vice versa. So you already know that your mix is, I'm just mixing to make sure that the mics are sounding good on the people, not that the mix is usable in an editing room, because I already know it's not, so then you throw it off to Michelle, and then her and her assistants, I'm sure, split it to some level that they can even understand the scene.
Richard, for you and Tom, then tell us about starting to shape all that material.
Yeah, that all went into Tony Martinez's capable hands, and he had some help editorially. And it was preparing all those tracks. Tony also recorded some group for that scene and basically prepared all the tracks to make them accessible, to make everything accessible to Tom, so that he had all the options. Everything was filled out. Obviously, you could hear the microphones had a big pattern, so they would pick up the people around the person talking. And I think the scene comes out so well because it is a party. They were having it felt like everybody was at a party, and they were all having real conversations. It didn't rely upon loop group. So if you turned up one of these conversations, they were actually having a real conversation. It wasn't just kind of loop group babble. There was loop group babble there, but it was the furthest people away from us. Tom had a go at it for about a week.
You get all these different parts, and then I'm thinking, okay, well, how do I deal with this? In Atmos, I want to make a really cool, great sounding, very wide and immersive experience, because I want us as the audience to be in the middle of that party too. It's not just that we're watching this distant, safe thing that's way over there. We're in the middle of it, and if we're not in the middle of it, there should be a reason why we're not, because there are a couple of shots there where we're a little bit removed from it, which is a very deliberate choice. But, the trick becomes, when all these microphones are picking up, sort of conversations on top of conversations, it can either, fight with each other if you're trying to pan these things out and separate them. Then, like, the thing that is, let's say, Lenny talking to somebody right in the center of the screen, and if there's somebody off to the right of him who's also talking to somebody, and that's not as important of a conversation, but Lenny's loud enough that he's being picked up on that guy's microphone, well, now it's going to, like, pull our image, and make us, go, whoa, what's going on here? And it's not consistent, because depending on how they turn and how loud they are and all that. And so you have to really figure out what parts you can use at what moment and what ones you can't. And, as Steve was mentioning earlier, sometimes, somebody comes up close to somebody else and they actually sound better on the other person's microphone because they're actually talking to the microphone. So really, I mean, it's like, Richard was saying, it takes time to both edit all that material, and then there's some in there that, Tony's going through and going, this isn't really usable. We're not going to need that, for whatever reason. And so he thins out some, and then I get it, and I kind of decide what is important at any given moment, and how are we going to shape that, and what, how we can get away with this or that. And then another big thing that's going on in that scene that we play with that actually helps is perspective. There's different perspective shifts where, depending on how distant we are, and sometimes we might be far away from them, but we still want to hear them and feel them close. And other times when we're pulling away and that we actually want to push them away, the camera kind of goes inside the vestibule of the front door of the house and kind of hides there for a moment. And there's a point where it goes back and hides there, and Jamie comes out from the other room and comes over, and then we go out into the room, and it kind of like wraps back around us. And so, we get to play with all that stuff.
You guys have done a great job of doing my job for me, and bringing up Dolby Atmos without me bringing it up. But I feel like Bradley Cooper is a director who has really embraced Atmos and really kind of enjoys it as a storytelling tool. And I was blown away by the sequence. I think it's the premiere of Mass. We're in the box with Lenny, and of course there's the whole drama going on between Tommy and Felicia and Lenny, but the way you guys mixed that performance in Atmos in that room was just really stunning to me. Tell me a little bit about Bradley's embrace of that tool and how you guys used Atmos in the track.
We did A Star Is Born, and our initial mix of A Star Is Born was in 7/1. And after we had completed the 7/1 mix, and we even showed it to the studio, and everybody was happy with it, we then moved to a different stage that could do Atmos at the time, and started working on the Atmos mix. And we were doing little things, and Bradley go, "Oh, that's really good. We should do that in the 7. Like, we need to go back and do that in the 7/1 mix." And after a handful of those notes, I said, "Whoa, check it out. We can make a 7/1 out of our Atmos," and sort of proved that to him, showed him how that works, and then it was kind of like, okay, throw away the 7/1 mix. We're going with the Atmos, and it will fold down well from there. And so I think because of that experience, and as we went then through a movie that was theoretically done mixing and elevated everything by now putting it in Atmos, he really loved it and embraced that. And at that point it was like, okay, we were talking about Maestro at the end of A Star Is Born, and the thing that he was excited about and we were excited about was it's going to be amazing in Atmos. So
one of my favorite pieces of Bernstein's music that you guys laid in was that really wicked use of the West Side Story overture. It starts on the close-up of Felicia. She's very angry about the whole Tommy situation, and that music tells me that there's going to be a rumble coming. And it was just so it was such a perfect use. It was really fantastic.
He had a lot of the music cues already laid in the script when we were filming, so we would have music cues on set, just to kind of be able to play back, just for camera department, or the dolly grip to be able to push the camera at the right speed. So he was very, very locked into what music choices he had from. I mean, they've been planning it for years, trying to figure out what piece and what part of the piece goes in that part.
I love that one because it really plays this, juxtaposition of how clueless he is to his life choices at that point, and what he's doing to his life and his relationship with Felicia.
Let's see what you think. This is gorgeous. I know, isn't it lovely? Hey, all right, thank you. Come on. Let's go. Over here. There you go.
Honey, what do you want me to get?
You just get that big ass bag of kibble.
We can all feel that, can't we?
Wait, you see what I'm actually doing here? That's appalling.
Yeah, and then as soon as he comes around the corner, she calls him out on it, and boom! It's like we've all had that, right? You run into a brick wall, like, oh crap!
Oh boy!
Steve, I know, one of the huge challenges for you was that all of this, this music was going to be captured live. And so I'd love for you to just talk to us a little bit about, when you knew that, like the big set pieces, the Make Our Garden Grow, the choral performance, and then obviously the huge performance of the Mahler at Ely Cathedral. Once you found out from Bradley that this was going to be an important thing, that this music was all going to be performed live and it needed to be captured, how did you start to figure out how to, to make this happen?
We double checked and then triple checked that he wasn't kidding. And then Jason Reuter and I started thinking about, well, how do we do that? And what is the best way to capture it? And certain things were somewhat easy. When he's teaching the student how to conduct, it's kind of like, well, those are start and stops, and that would be really hard to do with a playback track. So of course it has to be live, and you want it to change. And then, which was the first thing we filmed, day one, and the first music piece we filmed.
I heard that scene at Tanglewood when he's coaching the student was actually day one with him and all of that makeup and the whole prosthetic thing.
And his prosthetic guy, Kazu, had COVID for the entire, we were going to all of a sudden it was going to be over. We're going to have to push a week if he doesn't test negative. We pushed a day. We were there setting up for 2 days going, well, this could be for nothing. We could be pulling this down and tomorrow. So, but yeah, that was the first day. And once that was, in the can and successful, it gave us all a little bit more okay, this is going to be not easy, but easier than we had imagined. And of course, Ely Cathedral has its challenges where it's a very big building. It's a very echoey concrete house. The reverb goes on forever in that place. And, the more Jason Reuter did the research, the more he'd call me and say, it's almost impossible to get a good recording in that place. We really got to convince him. Otherwise, I was like, you're not going to convince a moving train to stop on a dime. So we're going to do it. And I think, the idea being, well, how do we do it the best way? And we reached out to LSO and said, hey, you guys have played here before. Who do you, what companies have you used to record? And they turned us on to Classic Sound, which is a company that's been in the Ely Cathedral a bunch of times and records the LSO. And so for the next year, we would talk to Classic Sound and say, here's the idea. Here's what we want to do. But we want to record this in a way that you don't typically record an orchestra in. Even in a scoring stage, it's a little different. It's more separation. And what we want to do is try to capture this live, but in a way that, Dean and Tom and Richard, everybody could play in Atmos and really put the audience into the middle of that orchestra in a way that nobody's really heard unless you're in the orchestra, unless you're the conductor. And there's only a handful of people in the world that can stand in that position. So we really wanted to put that audience in that position, and how best do we do that? And we were very fortunate that Netflix took the gamble, because they were, it's a huge financial risk. If you have all those, the LSO and the choir and everybody performing live and you don't get it, that's a huge waste of money. And then you have to re-record it. You have to fix it and change it. And so we were fortunate enough to have the faith that, Netflix put behind us, and also, almost the overconfidence that we could get it, because we would show up and here we go. And we'd just start doing things, and you'd start setting it up, and you're just moving through it, not thinking. And there was only the moment when you were finished and you went, holy crap, we did it. That could have been a wipeout, but the fact that we got it, I think that I don't know. I think I slept better that night than I've slept in years. Because for years, you're thinking oh, this is going to be, because we're leading up to it. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we're going down the film. And then all of a sudden it's here's the big thing. And if we blow it, that's it. It's kind of like Bradley playing at Glastonbury for A Star Is Born. It's here's this giant scene. We're going to shoot it right at the end. Don't blow it, and then no pressure. But then as soon as it's over, you're that was easy, but it wasn't. Well, the Ely Cathedral we shot for 2 days. We prepped it for a day. We loaded in the day before. And the hard part is, you're always loading in, and then camera's also loading in at the same time. So it's it's not really, you kind of have to stay out of their way, and then we're working around them, they're working around us. But we shot for the first day, and in Bradley's words, he was saying he wasn't really feeling it. Like he was just nervous about the whole thing, because it's also for him, it's decades of building up to this moment in front of the best choir in the world, or best orchestra in the world, and you're pretending to be the conductor, and it's like the pressure that you're putting on yourself to be perfect, and you're just not hitting it. And so that night, I think he went back to the hotel and just thought about it and came in the next day and said, let me do it one more time. And let's just do this one shot where the camera goes around, because the whole movie we had filmed at that point, the whole thing. And it was all these big wide shots, all these shots that played in one. And the day before we shot it like a regular, movie or TV show where you're just doing a ton of coverage, and that way you can cut around mistakes or whatever it is. And so the next day he goes, you know what? Our film is really just these big wide shots. Let's shoot this shot with a crane, come all the way around, come back around. By the end of the song, be over Felicia's shoulder. And that's it. We shot that on the last day, the last take, and that was it. I mean, that was done. As soon as that take was over, everybody knew we had it. Even the LSO came up to Bradley and said, yeah, yesterday was terrible. Today you nailed it. That's the take you need to use.
And looking at it now, it's so inevitable. Like you need to land on Felicia at the end of it. It's amazing. So just a technical, how many microphones?
That one, I think we're up to 62 microphones, 62 tracks on that one.
Amazing.
I mean, some are used, some are not. We put radio mics on the opera singers. I don't think they'll ever get used. You use the actual mics, but you do it because you're like, well, let's just, they're singing, let's get a different mic on it, but you probably won't use it.
We're here, we might as well get it, right?
That's right. Yeah. These guys can always mute and delete later. Let's get them in abundance.
Dean and Tom, just any quick thoughts about just mixing that sequence? That must have been so much fun and yet terrifying at the same time.
It was a lot of fun. I would not say it was terrifying.
It was terrifying for Steve to record it. You guys just had to.
Yeah, well, once I had it, it was already recorded. So,
Yeah, I mean, worst case, I just say, oh, Morrow blew it. We'll have to.
I knew we had something, great in that. I mean, the movie is structured such that you're built up and leading to that thing. So I knew that was our climax in a way, in the movie. This was the top of the hill, and it really had to pay off, and it had to be everything you could expect out of something like that. And so yeah, there was definitely some massaging of the parts and trying to figure out how to really how to sort of make us get overwhelmed at different moments, with the sound. I mean, Bradley's performance is doing that, and just sort of like the scope of what's happening is doing that, but the sound has to do its part of, delivering that and really, the shape of it has to ebb and flow, and then like a low end in certain parts has to really like swell up, and it has to mimic your feeling of that, so it has to support that. And then there's the sort of geography of what's happening, and trying to make it feel like, oh, the choir's kind of over here, we gotta feel them over there, but you can't also with any of those parts do it too much, too deliberately, because it would, everything's on one side of the room. That wouldn't sound right. So, it's really a matter of feel. I mean, it's very much a matter of, I try to just put my sort of intuitive sense into work, and really go on just what I feel and how I feel about it, and try to like bring that out.
I remember a nice story that you guys have told, that when you're on the mix stage and you're playing back something, if anything throws you out just for a second or anything loses your attention, that's when you say stop and figure out what that is. And I always think that that's such an interesting way to do that, because that is the feel in, are you thinking about something else and why?
Anytime your focus is taken away, you got to find out why. And so much of the mix was all about feel, how we are feeling emotionally to what's going on, and what we're taking out, what we're pushing, sonically.
I think that's how we all work as sound people, right? That's. I mean, there's no blueprint to any of this, and it really is just not just, but it is responding as an audience, responding viscerally.
I think that's a great way to wrap up the conversation. You guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you about this movie. It's always fun to have you guys on the Dolby podcast.
Thanks, Glenn. Great to see you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn.
Many thanks to Richard, Tom, Dean, and Steve for joining us on the podcast today. Maestro is now streaming on Netflix and Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We'd like to thank our friends at Netflix for helping us put this conversation together during a very busy awards season. Best of luck to all of our guests on March 10th at the 96th Academy Awards, coming to you live from the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. And speaking of the Academy Awards, as I mentioned up top, this episode is part of our continuing coverage of the 2024 Oscars. If you'd like to hear more conversations with fellow nominees in this category and more, be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thank you for joining us.